are one or two people here tonight who may be marketing and publicity freelance people, you know, I can speak for myself, but I think the same could be true for my friends over here. My focus is really on making the book as good as it can be, and sort of having marketing things in my head as I work on it, but I don't actively work with writers on the marketing and publicity. However, if they need referrals, we've got people we can point them toward and say, take a look at these people. Because as we're into this really hybrid thing, you know, a lot of stuff is you know, people have these great freelance you know, skills now, including, you know, if you're a writer and you have a manuscript and you know that there's this way to reformat it and get it out to all the, you know, different ways of selling it, Amazon and, you know, all the different ones. There are people who simply convert your book for you, and, you know, we try to push people in the right direction if that's what they're looking for too. But I myself am not an expert yet. I hope, you know, I hope I'll have time to figure more out, but at least there are people who do that.
Yeah, and I get materially, I guess, a bit involved. I get informally involved, advising informally on marketing and referring them to people who can help them run a campaign if they're self-published. And again, just because of the nature of how my projects are put together, the editor is very much involved in the art stages and what markets you're going to present it to, how you want to sell it in the comic shop retail market, how you want to sell it in the book distribution market. So you get, with the publishers I work for, I do get involved with those in-house discussions, maybe a little bit more than the others.
Hi. No, go ahead.
I have a finished manuscript. I've spent the last year sending out to agents. Pretty much everyone's responded. I've heard back from 12 agents, and each wants specific changes, none of them overlapping. And then all of them tell me it's a subjective business. Do you have any thoughts or advice?
That's a great question.
I wrote a little essay for one of our newsletters where I told this funny story about how I used to go out with this Russian emigre playwright who wrote this novel. And I had never seen rejection letters at that point. I'd just been writing them. And he came to my apartment one day and laid them all out on the floor. He had 12 rejection letters. The first 6 said, the beginning of this book is fabulous, but unfortunately the ending, the last section, is just not working. The next 6 said, the beginning is very slow, the ending is really strong, I think you should work on that. And we just couldn't stop laughing. So you have to realize that a lot of editors at the houses can't buy the book for whatever reason. It might have nothing to do with your book. You know, they have limited budgets for first fiction for the season, and they want to say something vaguely encouraging or helpful, so they just kind of wing it. So I would say read them for, if you can tell if they're going to be on the first 20 pages, if there's a little more substantive commentary, take the one that speaks to you most directly and try to, you know, ponder that one and figure that the other ones have nothing to do with you. And they're not. This is the truth.
Sometimes when we're going to work on a book, you know, an agent has sent it out and gotten some of those initial no thank yous back. I will ask to look at them because they can be parsed. Some of them are exactly what Pat's talking about. They're really polite, blah, 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 this means nothing, I just have to, this book's not going to work for our house, so I'm just going to say something and push it off my plate. Sometimes you're lucky and, you know, several are sort of making overlapping comments. What it really means is something about this book isn't right yet, and some of the people who take the time to write back to you really are making substantive, valuable comments that you can use, and sometimes we're able to sort of pick between them and figure out, all right, these are real considerations, and these are this person barely read, you know, very much, and that's irrelevant.
Did you mean that you sent out queries to 12 different agents and they all agreed to take a look and they wrote back to you?
Full manuscripts.
So you got 12 agents to, you must write a really good query letter.
So there you go.
So your query letter writing is excellent. I see a wonderful writer in the audience. I taught a course at the Tribeca, 92nd Street Y, and we talked in the class about query letter. So your query letter is excellent. So you got agents to look at your book, and so it wasn't editors who were writing you back, it was agents. Okay.
Oh, sorry, my example was a little misleading.
Okay,
but.
so, well, that tells me that you're definitely on the right track. You have a, you have a book that sounds really good. I haven't read the letters yet from the agents, so I can't parse what the agents are saying, but my feeling is you're on the right track and you need more intel. You need more intel about what was really in those letters.
I have a question also. Did you really research the agency
Yeah, I was gonna
lists
say that.
before you sent it to them? In other words, agents are, especially the small independents, they're very selective. And if you actually look at the other writers they publish and write a letter that says, I so admire so-and-so, and I hope that this might find a place to do this, did you actually research, or you just kind of did it? How did you discover who to go to?
I looked at their clients. It was along similar lines. I was a wildland firefighter out in New Mexico, so I looked kind of like along military nature lines.
Well, that sounds like you did a good job.
Yeah.
You just have to keep trucking. That is the whole.
And maybe find that one trusted reader, whether you're hiring an independent editor or you find someone who really you can trust. Because you know how when you take a writing class, there are those one or two really good people in the class that you trust, and some of the other people you listen to politely, but you just don't think they're great. You need one or two people you really trust to try to help you evaluate where is the weakness in the book. Yes, and Orange?
Yes, I had a question about something that Jane said, but it's really open to anyone. I've written a memoir about a very, not intense, excruciating part of my life, and I wanted to write about that. And so I'm curious, how could a memoir be too personal?
Okay, well that's a very interesting question. No, it's good, it's personal. I think there was a very good series of essays on salon.com, which
Yes.
I really recommend to you. One of the people who wrote it, a lot of people, some in this room may know or know her work, Betsy Lerner, who used to be an editor, longtime editor. She's now become a very successful agent, reps Patti Smith's memoir, which Pat just referenced. She and other people have very good essays on this salon where they talk about this very issue. That I think the key is to find the prism through which you're going to tell your story. So if it's, let's say, a very problematic relationship with your mother, your child, whatever. I mentioned something in the beginning about something like that. The key is how do you frame the story? It's probably, not soup to nuts. You should probably find a way into the story that feels more targeted and more focused. And how do you tell it in a way that transcends what it is? And I was saying to Noreen, I had not been back in this building since it was the Mercantile Library, and I've been at the Mercantile Library because when I was at Scribner Publishing, I edited Alice Sewald's first book, which is a memoir called Lucky. When it first came into us, it was called Lucky, a Rape.
A what?
Lucky, a Rape.
A rape. Oh.
And that's but for some of you probably know that book, it then went on to great success after Lovely Bones was published, her debut novel. But that was a memoir about a young girl, end of her freshman year at Syracuse University, who was getting ready to leave for the summer, was dragged into a tunnel in a public park that is right near or on the Syracuse campus. I've actually never been to the campus. And, came very close to being murdered. And the police had said, you're very lucky because the last person who dragged him here was murdered, hence the title Lucky. Now that was a very tough subject, but what I felt made that subject luckily is not hugely universal, particularly for rape, but although obviously more than chippy, but because Alice wrote about it in a way that her wit, or the way she was able to look at it in a certain mordant way, she was able to find the assailant to get a sketch done, and there was a trial, and it was a very successful trial. He was put away for about 18 or 20 years. And in the trial, you just get the sense of someone who incredibly well told, very dramatic. I mean, you sort of couldn't put the book down. And at the end, I think you felt as though, hopefully most readers will not have been dragged into a tunnel and fight for their life, but, you know, we all have had adversity of some kind or another. And she told about it in a way that I felt really transcended the particulars of that spring day in Syracuse. So that's a case where, you know, it was her artistry, her sensibility, her writing ability. So a memoir can never be too personal, but you know how it is when you go to a wedding or a bar mitzvah, and you know, some people are great at giving toasts. They tell an anecdote about the person that really gets to the essence of who that person is. Some people are like, I'll never forget the night we were at the bar, and I was like, and we had the bar, remember old scene, you know, so it's that difference.
I think it's also, it basically is a matter of saying, okay, I'm very close to this material for obvious reasons, but in the course of telling the story, it's not just going to be and then, but I'm going to create a literary work of memory that resonates for different readers on different levels. You can stay just far, you find a way to be just far away enough from what happened to you to be able to find, sort of add new layers of meaning to the story. I think a really good example, if anybody here has read it, is Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, which is also a very well-known graphic novel, and which is, and it's hard to categorize, and everybody I've spoken to who ever read it, and first of all, a lot of people who are into graphic novels have read it, and it's actually now running as a musical adaptation of all things at the Public. But it's essentially about her relationship with her father, who was a closeted gay man, and who died mysteriously when she was in college, and he may have either been in a road accident or killed himself, and she's never been able to figure that out, and they had a very tortured relationship. And it's a beautiful book, and it's beautiful because what happened was very painful, but she found a way for it to speak to different people on different levels. And everybody I speak to has a different experience from reading that memoir. Some people relate to her own struggle with coming out and his sexual identity. So for them, it's a memoir about sexual identity. For other people, it's a memoir about literature, because it was the only way she could communicate with him was through literature. For some people, it's a memoir about New York in the 70s. It works on a lot of different levels, and that's what you want to achieve.
I've worked on a ton of memoirs as a freelancer, and I love working on them because they're so interesting for the reasons Jane talked about. How do you find the core of the story? And I always tell people the biggest problem is you have to make yourself a character. In other words, you have to have the distance. You're not really writing your whole life. You're creating a literary work. In other words, art has to, be larger than the life. That means you have to cut things. You just have to cut, and it's so hard to do that when it's your story. And I learned a tremendous amount about this working with Rebecca Eaton from Masterpiece Theater. Her book's just coming out in a few weeks. And she's so good at figuring out things like cliffhangers, how to end the chapters, what to tell it, when not to, from 26 years of reading scripts. And working with her, I wrote a whole, big thing for her that was kind of a history of her show. And she said, oh no, this has to go, this has to go, this has to go. And then she wrote on top of it in her own way, and watching her put her touch on it that really told her story. She was absolutely expert at hitting the emotional high points. Mm-hmm. And that is how you figure out how to really tell your story in a way you can get other people to read. But it's very hard. It's sometimes, a successive process. You have to go through a bunch of drafts, and you just can't get discouraged. If you really want to tell it, you just have to keep cutting and cutting and cutting, and gradually the shape will come out. And it's a very interesting process.
Anyone else? Yes?
A lot of writers these days can't really afford a freelance editor, and crowdfunding is definitely helping, but have you ever had anybody ask if they can pay you via the book deal they're going to get, or like a commission basis? Or is that something is that an idea you would entertain?
Not really.
I think Marjorie has.
It is not.
I think
It's not a crazy question.
Yeah.
I think Marjorie has. Our 5A member, the second couldn't be here tonight for his argument.
She did something where she took points. In other words,
Yes.
if the book sells, you'll give me X percentage.
And the book did sell.
Yeah.
A recent book did sell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it did.
yeah.
It's not, I think it happens rarely because you know, we really sort of need cash flow usually, but I think, I think we all feel like if a certain opportunity came up, you know, we would certainly consider it, because it has come up, you know, agents,
Well, and we had it for here,
and then
we had it for
writers.
Center for Fiction.
Sure.
Right, that's sort of in a separate,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I certainly have sometimes, if I felt it was something I really wanted to work on and I stated my fees and the person said that's really just way too high, something if I really wanted to work on, it came to a great agent or something I really felt a personal connection to, I thought had a decent shot at getting published, I have said what would you be comfortable paying, and we've been able to work it out.
Yeah, I did that once too. I had a very good agent approach me, a guy had written a novel, and he was an illustrator actually. And the book was very interesting, and it was short, and
Yes.
I didn't have a lot of money.
That helps.
And I said, well, I would have to charge X, and he said, well, I can't do that, but would you do it for Y? And he was just such a nice man, and I really liked the book, and it was short. I said, okay, I'll do it. So it just depends.
So yeah, I mean, it does. It depends on the project. I mean, we just, like Judy said, we have to think about our cash flow. We don't have. I mean, I'm not saying that agents really have this luxury hand over fist, because they work very hard. But we don't. The way we work, we're not necessarily like able to depend on a stream of royalties from the people that we have placed. You know, once we edit a project, we love it, but then more often than not, it's gone. It doesn't necessarily recruit for us, so we have to be flexible about what our arrangements are.
Yes, I
Can you say roughly what you do charge people?
I think we're more comfortable doing that individually. If you're at all curious, approach any one of us and tell us what what your project is, and then we can probably give you an estimate.
We all have, a bunch of us have websites with the rates on them too, so you can see it right online. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I think you were first.
Oh, Judy's doing it, I'm sorry.
No, how about you and then you?
Thank you.
I have two questions though.
Oh.
One is all this information on with this website that's FOG Ed or something like that?
Well, it's not a website. I couldn't drag these guys into a site. And to be fair, we all have enough trouble keeping up with our own websites. We decided we just didn't have the time. We do have a Facebook page.
We also have cards, so if you're interested, we can dig out the cards after this, and we're happy to give you one. And what it has is, here's how to find out more about each one of us.
Yeah, I can actually leave some of them up here.
That's a good idea.
There's a
Let's
list
do
of our
that.
websites
Yeah.
on the back.
And a lot of this info is in the essays we've written for the online newsletter. So if you get
That's a
onto
good
that, you can read, I wrote about some of the stuff I mentioned, Jane has, we all have. So it's on there in different forms, in little short tapes.
What stage of a completed object do you want to be submitted to you to work on? Do you want someone to send you a complete manuscript or a couple of chapters or what?
Well, I would say that usually if someone's approaching me directly, not through an agent, what I will say is, can you tell me a little bit about your book, give me a synopsis of whatever description, and then I always want to look at 30 pages or so to make sure that I at least share some sensibility. And that it's something I feel I can improve, because, Joe mentioned if I have absolutely no feeling for science fiction. I mean, none, zero. I've never read one. I mean, I just no. Same with fantasy. I mean, not Harry Potter, but I would argue that's not really. Well, anyway, to me that's not exactly fantasy. But hardcore fantasy, science fiction, forget it. I just have no feel for it. And there are other categories as well. So I would want to feel as though I know a bit of the literature in the area you're writing in, whether it's memoir, narrative nonfiction, popular psychology. I just worked very briefly on a self-help thing, came to me from a New York Times journalist, where I didn't feel, it's not an area I've published in, so I referred that to actually a former colleague from Open as well, who had edited some self-help titles and so forth. So yes, I always want to look at a little bit first, just to make sure it's a good match.
But the flip side of your question is, I think it's really up to each writer when it's time to bring an independent editor in. I feel like often it's when you really feel like you're ready to turn it over and you're sort of stuck and need help pushing it up to the next level. And if you're ever not sure, you can do what Jane's talking about, a consultation to figure out, is now the time to invest in this.
I think we have to just take just one more question.
Yeah, this is not that important anyway. I was just curious. How often do you say no? But if it's within your genre and the thing you are interested in and the money is right, how often, how much do you get to say no? No, I don't really.
A lot more now than we
Yeah.
did maybe even a couple of years ago, because I think maybe we're all getting a lot of queries, and some stuff is really good that comes into us, but it's just not right for us. I used to feel when I was at Random House and I, was looking at submissions, there was this feeling I got that was like zing, when something, I really get it. It may not be perfect, but I really love something about it. I'm connecting with something. And that doesn't happen all the time. You can like something and work on it, but if you don't have to absolutely love it, like this is the best thing I've ever seen, but you have to really like something about it. And I think if I don't feel that, I'm not working on that book, because another editor will love it, and that's the editor that should be working with that writer.
And that's the beauty of having the group, again, is that I think this was mentioned already, but if somebody comes to us and the project doesn't seem right, or we can't fit it into our schedule, which
Well,
also
that's what I was
sometimes
going to say,
happens,
that's what I'm finding.
we can refer to each other, or we're compiling an outside referral list as well, that
Yes,
we know
yes.
with. So
Yeah.
it's no but.
When I first went independent, I was so scared that I would take things on just to pay a bill, and it was a bad idea. It was just like when you're a publisher and you say, oh God, I have such a literary list here, I don't have any commercial fiction. This is really kind of trashy, but maybe it'll sell. No. You have to be the real reader for that book. You have to understand why people read Jackie Collins and Danielle Steele if you want to publish that kind of book. You have to be the reader. So you can't act in bad faith. And a couple times I read someone's book and I really didn't like it, but I needed the money. I wrote a report, but I don't know if it was helpful. It wasn't good. It wasn't a good interaction. I said, I'm never doing that again. I'll just have to figure out how to negotiate this in a more, what's the right word? In good faith.
Well, thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it.